hear me. I can sing. No, I cannot sing, actually. So hello, thank you again, Marcus, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you to listening to this in English. Unfortunately, my Portuguese is still limited to phrases like "o gato bebe leite." That won't be sufficient for what I want to tell you, so I have to do it in English. So thank you for listening to this in English. I'm very happy to be here. It's my first time at PUCI, and I think Marcus, I haven't understood everything you said before, but I think Marcus mentioned it in the introduction, that I'm being here, my stay here is part of an ongoing cooperation between the CRT department at USP and the Medientheater at Humboldt-University, which is the project space that I'm directing at Humboldt-University. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. And this whole collaboration was initiated by Marcus Bastos and me, together with Patricia Moran from USP, 7 years ago now. And I'm really happy that this is now expanding to other institutions here in Brazil, or at least here in Sao Paulo, like PUCI. So thank you for inviting me to talk here. Thank you for coming here. So I'm gonna start. As I said, I'm director of the Medientheater at Humboldt-University in Berlin. That's a project space that forms part of the section for media dramaturgy within our media studies program. And it's dedicated to the exploration of the synergies of theater and media technology, mainly by students, but again and again also by guest artists, such as Marcus Bastos, who was a guest artist at the Medientheater a few years ago. And the focus of the Medientheater is not on human actors. It's called a theater, but the focus is not on human actors, but on media apparatuses. And by developing audiovisual performances, it aims at scrutinizing the hidden potentials and limits of these apparatuses and their impact on our societies. So what I intend to do today is to give you some examples of the work that has been done at the Medientheater during the previous years, and also more generally within the media dramaturgy section. And by doing this, I do not only intend to give you an idea of the kind of objects that we are exploring, but also about the methodological and epistemological questions that are connected with these explorations. As the work of the Medientheater can be understood as a form of artistic research, these questions are related to the field of tension that arises between practical, aesthetic approaches to media technologies on the one hand and theoretical, scholarly approaches on the other. And this lecture is going to focus on two case studies that represent both of these sides. The first case study that I want to talk about was a production of the Medientheater, an artistic project which casts a light on the characteristics of digital images in real-time online communication. And the second one was a research project that examines the new possibilities of image-generating artificial intelligence. And both of them, however, eventually turned out to be experiments in artistic research. As the title of this lecture indicates, what manifests itself in these projects could be described as technological perception and technological thought, by which I do not mean the way we humans perceive technology or think about technology, but the way technology itself is perceiving and thinking. And I have to add here that expressing it this way, speaking of a technological perception and a technological thought, is a strong and perhaps even dangerous simplification. I'm not sure if it actually makes sense to say that technology perceives or thinks, because this is just a projection of human categories on non-human entities. And I'm going to try to approach this in a more differentiated way by resorting to the ancient Greek term of logos. But before I get to this and to two case studies that I would like to concentrate on, let me give you some more general information about the work of the Medientheater, the philosophical ideas that inspired it, and also about its institutional context. So there's going to be a quite long part where I want to give you some general information before I actually get to the two case studies that I'm talking about. So bear with me. I think, I'm not entirely sure, I think this is going to last roughly about an hour, and of course afterwards there's going to be room for questions and discussion. So, as I just mentioned, media dramaturgy is the name of the section of the media studies program at Humboldt-University, within which the Medientheater, this project space, is operating. And what we're doing in this section is actually what in most other media studies departments would be called media aesthetics. And the fact that we call it not media aesthetics, but media dramaturgy, allows us to place ourselves in the tradition of dramaturgy that basically goes back to Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. So Lessing was a central figure of German Enlightenment in the late 18th century. And it was also Lessing who, in the late 1760s, conceptualized a modern understanding of dramaturgy, in which the term does not just signify the composition of a theater play or any other kind of performance, but also stands for a certain form of discourse. And that's a discourse that emerges from direct exchange with practical, theatrical, performative, or generally artistic work. Lessing worked for the Hamburg National Theatre from 1767 to 1769. That was a very, very important project in the anti-aristocratic democratic theatre. And there's a very famous essay collection that is the outcome of this period, which is called the Hamburg Dramaturgie, the Hamburgische Dramaturgie. And in this title, that's the term dramaturgy signifying a theatrically inspired writing method, so to speak. Here on the presentation, you can see that's the Hamburg Dramaturgie. The content of this book, of these collected essays in there, covers a very, very wide range of topics, questions of drama and theater aesthetics. It's an early example of systematic theater criticism. But it's also an inquiry into more general questions, such as the political role of theater in a democratic society and the fundamental ethical questions that are connected with this topic. So dramaturgy in this tradition founded by Lessing is so closely intertwined with artistic production in the theater that you could consider it a form of artistic research. It is a method rooted in practice, but it pursues theoretical objectives by eventually inquiring into the psychological and sociological conditions of possibility of theater. So in our age, I would like to suggest dramaturgical questions also include questions of technology, by which I literally mean questions concerning the logic of techniques, or more generally, the logos of techniques. This logos has been described as technologos by media theorist Wolfgang Ernst, who until recently was a professor at Humboldt-University. Logos in ancient Greek stands for a variety of concepts such as word, reason, principle. And it can also refer to speech or, more generally, to any form of logical argument. And of course, logos is also contained in the word technology. And you may ask, why do I not just say technology instead of using this strange neologism, technologos? But as the philosopher Martin Heidegger has pointed out in his famous 1953 lecture, The Question Concerning Technology, die Frage nach der Technik, when we speak of technology, we speak of a tool for human control and progress. The term technologos, however, signifies the new forms of meaning-making that come into the world with modern technologies of information processing and that are separated and independent from human meaning-making. They are not necessarily under our control or bound by our ideas of progress. This raises the need to understand the human condition in an age when it is profoundly shaped and assimilated by such an autonomous technological condition. And I would like to suggest that media theater and dramaturgy may provide a valuable tool in order to achieve such an understanding. After all, theater in the ancient Greek tradition is a place where logos can be perceived sensually, traditionally in the form of dialogue. By the way, in between I want to inquire, is the microphone like this okay? Am I speaking too loudly, not loud enough? Okay, good, thank you. So, what happens when we apply the method of dramaturgy not to a theater of humans, as Lessing does, but to modes of production in which media apparatuses play a decisive role? Is there a specific logos of these apparatuses that manifests itself in a media theater and that can be grasped through its dramaturgy? This is the main question behind the work of the Medientheater at Humboldt-University. And its goal is therefore to take the conjunction of the two terms which name is made up of, further than merely examining how theater may profit from applying contemporary media technologies. It aims at de-anthropologizing the concept of theater by thinking of media technical devices not merely as tools to expand the possibilities of human actors, but as actors in their own right. Based on this approach, the experiments that were undertaken in the Medientheater over the past years included performances that turned the stage and its machinery into, as I said, autonomous actors, and sometimes even got rid of human performers altogether, replacing them not only with obsolete media apparatuses, but also with non-human animals. Occasionally, all that was left in terms of theatrical spectacle was the screen output of computer algorithms or the noise produced by sound systems that had stopped transmitting human-like voices in favor of the voice of pure technology, transforming the noise from a disturbance into an aesthetic object. All of these works pursued the same goal: to explore how the long-standing art of theater may be applied to gain new insights into media technologies, to examine their effects on our bodies and perceptions, on our cognitive and affective matrix, as well as the political implications of these effects. The guiding philosophy behind this can be described as drawing on the Humboldtian ideal of higher education and Leibniz's Theatrum Naturae et Artis. So the ideas I'm referring to here originated from three more heroes of German intellectual history, The first one being Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the philosopher and polymath from the late 17th and early 18th century. And the other two ones being the Humboldt brothers, Wilhelm von Humboldt and Alexander von Humboldt, who worked in the early 19th century and who are now the people featured in the name of our university, the Humboldt University. Wilhelm von Humboldt, the one brother, was a linguist, but was also an educational reformer that was responsible for the structure of universities, like the one I'm working at now, that were created in the early 19th century. And Alexander von Humboldt was a very famous natural scientist who was also very active in Brazil. So how does the Medientheater align with this idea? On the one hand, most of the performances in the Medientheater are devised by students. And in this respect, they stand in the tradition of Wilhelm von Humboldt's model of integrating arts and sciences and combining studies and research, aesthetic research in this case. On the other hand, these performances attempt to contribute to renewal of the Humboldtian ideal in a digital world by directing the profound curiosity that characterized Alexander von Humboldt's view on nature onto the technologies of media that have become our second nature. It is this curiosity that inspires the perspective of any theater. And the term theater does, of course, not simply signify a location where something is presented. Theater also stands for the idea of bringing something to life, of animating by presenting. And it was in fact Leibniz, often considered, as I mentioned, the last German polymath in the late 17th century, who championed the concept of a theatrum naturae et artis, a theater of nature and arts. Leibniz was devoted to this idea throughout his life and conceived of it as, that's a quote from Horst Bredekamp, art historian who has done extensive research on Leibniz. Leibniz conceived of it as a collection of virtually everything that humans can meaningfully do, making the exhibits an event by presenting them as if they were living stage actors. So the goal of a profound reform of the sciences that focused not on seriousness, but on play and pleasure, that Leibniz thus pursued, also inspires the Medientheater. Dedicated to this idea of a theatrum naturae et artis, the Medientheater does not simply consider media technologies as specimens to be dissected, collected, and categorized. Instead, it applies the modus operandi of theatrical performance in order to observe them in action and understand them as constituents of a hidden dynamic that possesses its own autonomy. Okay. So before I finally get to the two case studies, oh no, that's intentional, sorry. I hope it's one. Before I finally get to the two case studies that I'm announcing, I want to give you one other example before that of a production of the Medientheater, simply because it illustrates the approach that I have just outlined in theory in a more simplified and straightforward way. I've briefly mentioned a performance that transformed acoustic noise from a disturbance into an aesthetic object. Its title was Echokammer, echo chamber in German, in English, and it was realized by a group of students in 2019. The production is reminiscent of the sound art piece I Am Sitting in a Room by the US-American experimental composer Elvin Lucier, which was first performed in 1969 and later on also released as a record. I'm Sitting in a Room was a succession of recordings of Lucier's voice and replays of these recordings and recordings of these replays. And Echo Kammer transformed Lucier's setup by turning it into a real-time device. The voice of a human performer was captured with a microphone, transmitted through a cable into an adjacent room, where it was played with a delay of a few seconds on a speaker, re-recorded by another microphone, and transmitted back and played into the Medientheater again. There it was again fed into the cycle of recording, transmitting, replaying, and re-recording. And I'm going to show you extracts in a second so you get a better idea. The whole performance was 13 minutes long. And in order to give you an idea of it, I'm going to play the first 2 minutes, then a part of the middle, and then the ending. And by the way, you're going to hear the text that is spoken. It's in German. It's one text that is spoken by the performer in German and then repeated several times before the performer is finally leaving the stage. And just like in Elvin Lucier's piece, this text describes basically what's happening in the performance. So it's a description of the technical setup, and the performer is simply talking and describing what she is doing herself in that moment. Okay, so I have to don't be scared if there's a weird noise, because now I have to attach this audio cable and there might be a weird noise. Okay.
Ich spreche in diesem Raum. Meine Stimme, meine Laute, Worte und der Rhythmus sind zu hören. Doch das Gehörte existiert unmittelbar doppelt. Es ist instantan und vergänglich und zugleich auch eine zeitkritische digitale Kopie. Das digitale Abbild meiner Laute und Worte durchläuft eine Strecke von 20 Metern in einen anderen Raum. Das Tonsignal wird zudem um 10 Sekunden verzögert.
Existiert unmittelbar doppelt. Es ist instantan und vergänglich und zugleich auch eine zeitkritische digitale Kopie. Das digitale Abbild meiner Laute und Worte durchläuft eine Strecke von 20 Metern in einen anderen Raum. Das Tonsignal wird zudem um 10 Sekunden verzögert. Im anderen Raum wird es über einen Lautsprecher instantan und vergänglich. Und zugleich auch eine zeitkritische digitale Kopie. Das virtuelle Abbild meiner Laute und Worte digitalisiert und auf einen 20 Metern Raum. Das Tonsignal wird zudem um 10 Sekunden verzögert. Im anderen Raum wird es über einen Lautsprecher instantan und vergänglich. Aber es zieht 20 Meter wieder mit zusätzlichen 10 Sekunden. Das virtuelle Abbild meiner Laute und Worte digitalisiert und auf einen 20 Metern Raum. Das Tonsignal wird zudem um 10 Sekunden verzögert.
Aber ich spreche weiter. Zu dem endlosen Kreis von Eingabe, Aufnahme und Wiedergabe summiert sich das Gesagte zu einem lauten Getöse.
Okay, I'm going to stop here. Now I'm going to show you a part of like a minute from the middle part. Okay, now I'm going to skip to the end. So I'm sorry, it was probably a bit difficult to tell apart what was actually part of the performance and what was part of the noise. Sorry, I forgot to unplug this. But I hope you got it. Also, I'm just realizing that I'm partly blocking, I think, the presentation, but I hope it's okay. I think you can see. Yeah. So what I would like to suggest is that. I would like to suggest to describe what we have witnessed here in this performance as the gradual and then total substitution of the voice of the human by the voice of technology. And since in theater the human voice is traditionally what brings across logos, this logos has of course disappeared as well. I do not think, however, that we can speak of a technologos that took over the place of the human in this case. If there really is a voice of technology here, it remains entirely in the realm of, to use another Greek word, phone, the pure physical phenomenon of speech without rational structure. So when looking for a technologos in media theater, we have to take another step, and this finally brings me to the first one of the two main case studies that I want to talk about. So the performance I'm going to talk about now was actually not staged in the Medientheater. It was not staged in the Medientheater itself, although it was a Medientheater project, but it was an online theater production. The Lockdown Diaries, presented in July 2020 via YouTube, while the 15 performers were sitting in their homes connected via Zoom. This presentation was the outcome of a project seminar conducted by my colleague Martin Meyer and me during the COVID pandemic. In March 2020, as the first wave of the pandemic broke in Europe, it became clear that all classes in the summer term would have to be held online. And like so many university instructors, my colleague Martin Meyer and I wondered how we could conduct our project seminar, originally supposed to be taught in the Medientheater, under these new circumstances. Since we were all confined to our homes, we decided to assign the students a task that made the most of the situation. We asked them to document their lives under the conditions of social distancing and the pandemic lockdown in the form of video diaries. So the goal was to make the state of exception that we all found ourselves in available to artistic reflection and to produce a record of what life was like during the pandemic. The idea was drawn from a variety of inspirations. they reached back as far as the Decameron, Giovanni Boccaccio's collection of novellas from the 14th century, a founding work of Italian literature, with its young adults, like our students, being confronted with a pandemic and using it as an opportunity to seclude themselves and delve into storytelling. Our plan was to bring together the escapist pleasures of the Decameron with the ethnological rigor of the Cinema Verité classic Chronique d'un été, Chronicle of a Summer, from 1961 by Jean Rouch and Edgar Morin, a film which relies on the auto-documentary intensity of young adults not being talked about by ethnographers and directors, but by providing filmic narrations of their lives themselves. And on top of this, J.G. Ballard was an influence as well, with his grim science fiction stories about future societies in which social distancing and self-isolation in the domestic space have become the norm, as in Ballard's story, The Intensive Care Unit, which is featured in this collection that you can see here. The weekly meetings of the seminar were held as Zoom conferences. Every week, the students streamed their most recent video diaries from their computers, and we viewed and discussed them collectively. This setup was reminiscent of live conferences on television, where different people in different places are connected so they can engage in a real-time conversation. So here I've just collected a few television images that illustrate this idea. On the left you see that's a screenshot from Live Aid from 1985, which is a very, very important step in the history of television or media history in general, because it was one of the very early media events that happened on 2 continents at the same time and could be observed together. So on the left you see the UK, and on the right you see the USA, Philadelphia, in live images. And the other the lower image here is from the Eurovision Song Contest, which is a very important media event in Europe, where also you have live transmissions from different places in Europe at the same time. And the other photos are from the Republican National Convention in 2020 in the United States, and demonstrations against it that were also happening in different places at the same time. So these live TV conferences produce a certain kind of image, which may be hybrid and complex, but is clearly defined by its spatial and temporal characteristics. All of these little images within the bigger image, within the TV frame, represent different locations, but they show all of them in the present moment. Their time format is liveness and simultaneity. So we set up the final presentation of the works of the seminar to be a vague imitation of such a televised live conference. And this is a screenshot from this final presentation. Just like during the weekly seminar sessions, the students, my colleague and I, met in a Zoom conference, and the students presented their video diaries to each other one by one. But this time the meeting was streamed on YouTube, and there an online audience could watch the 15 performers in their homes, arranged on the screen by the notorious Zoom gallery view, and interrupted repeatedly by full-screen presentations of the short diaries. And so here you see a few still images from this final presentation, but now I also want to show you extracts from the recording to give you a better idea. And again, I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to show you briefly how it began, and then I'm going to jump to the first video diary that then started, so you get an idea how the transition from the Zoom gallery view to the video diaries looked like. I'm sorry, I have to do this. So this was going on for a bit, and now I jump to when the first video diary starts. So I was stopping here because this video diary then actually relies a lot on German words. So I'm going to jump to the end now because I'm going to show you the last video. I'm going to show you the last video diary that was presented, and then you can also see how the performance ended. And this piece I'm going to show you now is going to be a bit longer. It's going to be about 5 minutes. I think now we're disconnected. But now we're connected again.
It's a kind of ghost.
But it's working out brilliantly. Maybe we can't have both at the same time. Yeah.
Entschuldigung, könnten Sie mal bitte Abstand halten? Das geht ja gar nicht.
antivirus programs have begun. Searching for security intruders. Again. Cross-dimensional firewall. Scanning city objects. Actual visual effects. 123 code 123 125 123 code 53455 Target Galaxy.
So that was also the last time we needed that sound cable, so no more weird noises. So often the simultaneous incidents that are covered by live conferences on television add up to one important event that unfolds in different places, as we've seen the Live Aid concert, the Eurovision Song Contest, or the Republican National Convention in this example. When the students showed their diaries, the important event that they were reporting on from their individual domestic points of view was the pandemic lockdown. The diaries were pre-recorded, and we were aware that they would therefore add an extra temporal layer. But another aspect impacted the temporal and spatial structure of the scene even more profoundly. Other than in the seminar's weekly meetings, the participants did not receive any peer reactions or comments on their videos. In fact, no interaction at all happened between the different tiles in the Zoom gallery. As a result, the whole scene was formatted in a way that clearly set it apart from the format of TV live conferences. Although the concept of live performance, July 14th, 2020, 8 p.m., emphatically emphasized the idea of presentness and simultaneity, the lack of interaction between the performers deprived the images from any clearly defined temporal reference. You could summarize it in terms of the theory of special relativity. Without any interaction happening between two or more different places, it is impossible to establish a single meaning of the word now shared between these places. And at the end of the day, the audience had no way of knowing if they were actually watching a live transmission or if some or all of the tiles in the gallery were actually showing actions recorded in the past. In a similar manner, the spatial reference of the images appeared to vanish. Although the scene pretended to take place in a clearly defined, even though virtual space, the Zoom gallery in the lockdown diaries was in fact nothing but a hybrid assemblage of monadic existences that had no connection to each other, certainly no connection that could be classified in spatial terms. Instead of communicating with each other, the performers eventually engaged in the more or less meaningful activities that so many people turned to in the isolated cells of their homes during the first lockdown. Folding origami, practicing yoga, working out, and so on. Their actions appeared to be synchronized, but because of the absence of any observable cause-effect relationships between them, the scene turned time and space into an irrelevant category. It transcended time and space. And it did so by putting the performers in a state of general isolation. Their actions, taking place next to each other on screen, did not connect to anything or anyone outside whatever tile was assigned to them. One could apply a term from the film philosophy that Gilles Deleuze formulated in his books on cinema in 1983 and 1985 to describe the situation, saying that the Zoom gallery in the lockdown diaries appeared to be void of any sensory motor links between the individual images that it consisted of, suggesting what Deleuze calls a sensory motor break between the world and the human subjects contained in their individual tiles on screen. The Zoom gallery as a whole became a depiction of this break, a type of image that might be considered as a return on the computer screen of what Deleuze described as the time image in cinema. And this is remarkable because we had set out to create a completely different kind of image. An image with a time structure similar to those of TV live conferences, an image that was supposed to be merely a container for the video diaries. These videos were intended to reflect the situation we all found ourselves in during the lockdown. But it turned out that the Deleuzian time image that we produced instead was what actually provided the reflection of our situation. For Deleuze, the cinematic time image produces a specific form of thinking. It does so by exposing the, quote, powerlessness to think the whole and to think oneself. So, by the way, what you see on the left here now are two screenshots from two major examples of Deleuze for the time image. Above it's Il Deserto Rosso by Michelangelo Antonioni, and on below it's L'année dernière Marine by Alain René. So, yeah, the time image produces a specific form of thinking, and it does so by exposing the powerlessness to think the whole and to think oneself. The lockdown diaries reveal that this futility of attempting to intelligibly grasp the individual or the totality of the world, or the relations between these two, also forms part of the experience of communication devices such as Zoom. Transcending space and time, the scene we had created appeared as a process of thought that reflected the situation we all found ourselves in during the lockdown, when most of our social contacts were reduced to video conferences and an atmosphere of stasis and a waning sense of self-efficacy were spreading. Let me point out once more that when our performance turned into a time image, it had completely diverged from its original inspirations. While the lockdown diaries had started out as a process in which humans presented their lives by using a certain setup of media technologies to produce video diaries and stream them in conference calls, in the end it had turned, instead, into a contemplation of the impact of technologies on our perception of ourselves and our communities. It had turned into a thought process performed by generating a scene that contained a number of actors, but no sensory motor links in Deleuze's sense. And this is something that gradually happened while we were setting up and rehearsing the final presentation. I would like to suggest that this was neither something happening by accident, nor a manifestation of our unconscious. If anything, it was a manifestation of a technologos, and in retrospect, it seems that the loss of the spatial and temporal reference of the images was driven by the specific media arrangement we were using. A global digital web reaching into every apartment, and a software establishing links between the inhabitants of these apartments, creating distributed communication clusters and representing them by a gallery of live video images. As German media scholar Jan Distelmeier pointed out in a recent publication on video conferencing, a publication which is also an outcome of the pandemic, quote, "Such platformized and programmatic relations are first and foremost regulated relations in and among computers, before they thereby, thanks to camera, microphone, monitor, touchscreen, and so on, bring people into relations." End of quote. In the case of the lockdown diaries, it seems it were these relations in and among computers that guided us humans to discard the model of the live conference in favor of a scene that resembled Deleuze's time image. I'm not trying to suggest that humans did not form part of this assemblage. We, very much did, but it seems that while working on the lockdown diaries, we were acted upon by the technology. And in the process, a form of thought articulated itself that was not, or at least not entirely, ours. We were witnessing a partly non-human thought which appeared to contemplate the transcendence of time and space as a fundamental characteristic of the media ecology from which this thought had emerged in the first place. And it was the scene of the lockdown diaries in which this thought eventually manifested itself. The lockdown diaries should therefore not be understood as an externalization of conscious or unconscious human thought processes. Instead, it should be considered as a manifestation of non-human technological thought in its own right, as it becomes intertwined with the thought of the human participants of the performance. And this brings us back to the notion of media theater. And now when I say media theater, in the English term, I'm not only referring to the Medientheater at Humboldt-University, but to a more general concept, media theater as a perceptual arrangement that allows us to observe non-human technological thinking. And this idea is, by the way, closely aligned with theater scholars Maike Bleeker's suggestion in her recent book, Doing Dramaturgy, quote, to conceive of theater as a thought apparatus. And the term apparatus here is being used in the sense of Karen Barat as a dynamic configuration of humans and non-humans from which understanding emerges. But what then is the role of media dramaturgy? From a research perspective, we can say that the non-human thinking, which appears in media theater projects such as the Lockdown Diaries, is occupied with basically the same questions as media studies. But there is a fundamental divide between these two modes of thought. The thought of media studies manifests itself in the form of discursive propositions, which may be true or false. The aesthetic thinking of media theater, however, articulates itself in the form of a scene that is neither true nor false, but just there, playing out, in our example, on the virtual stage of the Zoom gallery. To acknowledge this divide between the two forms of thought can be considered a key problem within the ongoing debate about artistic research. And I would like to suggest that dramaturgy can be of help here. Understood, as I mentioned in the beginning, as a mode of discourse that emerges from direct exchange with practical theatrical work and which therefore operates right at the border of aesthetic and propositional thought. In fact, dramaturgy in this sense is what I'm trying to do at this very moment. It is important that the, let us call, dramaturgical account that I have been giving you is not intended as an analysis, let alone an interpretation of the Lockdown Diaries, which would be a dubious endeavor because it is authored by one of the directors of the project. Instead, it should be understood as a report on the performance's genesis, highlighting some of the patterns of thought which it brought to light, and understanding them in terms of the theoretical concept of the time image. As a text consisting of statement that might be true or false, this report that I'm giving you right now inevitably takes the shape of discourse, which sets it apart from the performance it refers to. And it is along these lines that I understand the terms media theater and media dramaturgy. Media theater can be understood based on ideas such as Leibniz's Theatrum Natura et Artis as a perceptual arrangement that allows us to observe the operations of media technologies as a non-discursive form of thought unfolding in scenes. Based on this, we can conceive of media dramaturgy as a mode of discourse, a form of writing about media theater that interrogates the entanglement of human performers and non-human technologies and exposes technological thinking through discourse. So after having outlined these two central concepts, now I want to get to the second case study, which is an MA thesis that I supervised last year. And my remarks on the second case study are going to be much shorter than the first case study. So that's the MA thesis you see here. It was written by a student of ours called Raphael Tostlebe under the title "The Dramaturgy of AI-Generated Videos Between Anthropocentrism and Technologos." It deals with one of the most interesting and momentous developments in contemporary media culture, artificial intelligences that can independently generate film sequences based on large language models and artificial neural networks. I've already introduced the idea of technologos, and the question of the thesis is how this technologos, which is categorically removed from human perception, manifests itself in AI-generated videos. In order to explore this, the thesis investigates how the connection between visual concepts and natural language is achieved within neural networks, how the corresponding representations are translated into a latent space using diffusion models and retransferred into the pixel space to generate images, and how sequences of images that are perceived as a moving image can be created by splitting individual frames into base frames and residual frames. But furthermore, it was also part of the thesis, and this is the point I want to concentrate on, that Tostlebe worked with an artificial intelligence himself and had it generate 10 short videos. The text-to-video model he used was Cirroscope, and the prompt he used was, as you can see here, a train arrives on a station, on a platform in background, walk people. You will notice that this is grammatically incorrect. This is due to the fact that this form of putting it in this grammatically incorrect way works better with the artificial intelligence. And of course, as you probably also see, it's also a nice reminiscence of L'Arrivée d'un train en gare de la Ciotat, the famous film from the Lumière brothers from 1895, which is reputed to be the first publicly projected film in history. To ensure that the starting point, that means the seed, is different for each video, but that the basic conditions remain the same, the students had to analyze and adapt the code of the AI environment that he used, which was Camenduro. This just for the technical background. So I would like to show you the 10 videos that were generated based for the thesis in this research project from this prompt, which is going to be fast. They're very short. Each video is only 3 seconds long, so concentrate. You have to focus so you can see it. And I know you all know the Lumière film, but just as a little reminder, I'm also going to show you the 1 minute long original film, so to speak, by the Lumière brothers. Okay, now I'm going to show you the 10 films that were generated in the project. my favorite one. So when you see these videos, you might perhaps say that it was maybe too early to do a study like this, since the technology that is investigated clearly has not reached a fully functioning state yet. It does not yet produce the desired outcome, which would be glitch-free videos that are also a bit longer than 3-second clips. And even if the study was conducted right now, 1 year later, you would get much better results, since the technology has evolved massively over the last few months. However, examining AI-generated videos during such a critical and forward-looking phase allows to identify constitutive technological and aesthetic features that may be considered by future that may be obscured by future developments. You could even argue that it is a way of working on the archaeology of an emerging new medium. What comes into focus here are the moments when the video synthesis does not work the way it is supposed to. Where do these glitches come from? They emerge from the loop-like interconnection between technologos and human aesthetics that is at work here. Let me quote a passage from the thesis which describes how this interconnection works when it comes to color values. The videos that form the databases for the model were created by humans and are thus shaped by their perception as well as the sense of aesthetics. A neural network processes these videos technomathematically as abstracted information and has neither a concept nor an understanding of objects, colors, or color balance. All of the color design and color grading in the synthesized videos is thus ultimately based on human perception and human concepts. Both the guidance of the viewer's gaze through light-dark contrasts and the color balance are reflected in the value distribution of the videos that the neural network has learned. At this point, anthropocentrism influences the technologos, which in turn determines the phenomena that are presented to human perception. To put it shortly, AI videos represent a reinterpretation of human film aesthetics under the conditions of a mathematical technologos. And it is precisely the glitches, which might be considered as errors of the AI, in which the impact of technologos become visible. So far so good, but what does this have to do with artistic research, as I've claimed? There was a writing process involved in the project that I consider as an artistic process. Its outcome were 10 short texts, each one describing one of the videos that had been generated. The way this writing process was set up carefully took into account that the human cannot be considered as a distanced observer who is able to provide a neutral description of the clips. Rather, she, or in this case he, becomes part of a man-machine system. On one side, there is the computer, which generates and visualizes data sets from a noise signal using diffusion models. On the other side, there is the human, who perceives these visualizations as a continuous moving image in which objects and people can be identified by means of shape recognition. The whole constellation is more of a self-experiment than a scholarly analysis of film material. The study takes this into account by ensuring that the videos are viewed within a precisely planned arrangement that is identical for all of them. So I'm going to present you the video descriptions in the German original, but I'm going to translate the important parts into English. When one reads these video descriptions, it is striking that they not only outline the movements visible in the image, but also suggest states of mind. For example, in this one, most people seem to be sneaking. Such formulations, which go beyond pure analysis and suggest emotional interpretations of what is seen, are by no means literary exuberance. Rather, they take into account the phenomenological insight that every description requires presuppositions that project human affects onto what is perceived in order to provide meaning. At the same time, the process of perception can never be completely detached from the human body, as can be seen, for example, when one of the video descriptions suggests that, and that's the quote here, the eye now rests on a person at the right edge of the picture. Although they refer to moving images, these descriptions can be placed in the tradition of art historical ekphrasis. Despite, or perhaps because of, their matter-of-fact tone, they are small literary works of art that evoke a strange, absurd world. A world in which, for example, quote, two people run towards each other wearing one jacket made of the same fabric and coalescing despite running in different directions. Human bodies are visible both from the front and from behind, and the turning of a body causes a beige coat to turn into a black jacket, and, quote, pockets that were previously on the left arm are now on the right. And it is not only human bodies that undergo such transformations, but also a moving locomotive, for example, which, quote, changes successively into different types of locomotive. The technological video aesthetics that manifests itself here is one of alienation. Quote, the tension of the videos lies between the familiar and the predictable on the one hand, and irritation through repetition and shape-shifting on the other. One can grasp and recognize the content of the videos, yet what is depicted is beyond the realm of human experience. A transformative virtuality beyond the realm of human experience. A universe which on the one hand looks like ours, but in which, on the other hand, visual shapes and identities are constantly on the brink of dissolving. This is what this research reveals as the manifestation of the technologos in synthesized videos. I'm not going into detail here. The study has to say much more about the characteristics of this universe, but let us, in order to conclude, focus on the methodology. The way the study achieves its result is through a form of artistic writing, and I suggest to consider the contribution of this writing process as a form of artistic research. And it is revealing to follow the etymology of the term, as the word artistic is derived from the Latin ars, which in turn is the equivalent of the Greek noun techne. And this is, of course, crucial once we are confronted with the technologos. And that is why, in this variant of artistic research, the literary writing is interwoven with the technological writing process that the author of the study engaged in when he was manipulating the code. If we take the idea of technologos seriously, we have to face the fact that technologos itself necessarily eludes any form of human logos and therefore language. Which is why I would like to end my remarks on the alien phenomenology of AI-generated videos by simply presenting an image of this technological writing to you. So these are the two case studies that I wanted to present to you. I don't really have a conclusion to take out of these two studies. But instead I would like to suggest that we get into a discussion about the concept of technological perception and thought. And that I mentioned at the beginning, I'm myself skeptical about this, but I would really be interested in hearing your ideas about this topic, and of course any other questions on what I was talking about. So thank you very much for listening.
Good evening, Professor. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Gustavo Bucher. I am a PhD candidate here at PUC. In my master's, I studied the relationship between dramaturgy and interactivity studies in computers. So there's something very similar to...
sorry, which studies?
Between dramaturgy and
Okay.
interactivity studies.
Okay, thank you.
Based mainly on a Brazilian researcher called Arlindo Machado. Yeah.
Yes, I heard of them.
So I'm wondering, since we have Professor Bastos here too, I'm wondering how you deal with the question of presence in this works, because Bastos and Moran have this book about life, audiovisual, in which they talk about mediated presence, and you talked about this logos, which I would think in Gombrich would be the effect of meaning, right? So how does presence comes into play in this idea of media dramaturgy you're proposing? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, what I was I think in the two case studies that I was talking about, and also in the first short example that I've given, presence plays a very different role in each one of those. And maybe I would assume that as when questioning presence, the lockdown diaries might be the most interesting example, because what I was trying to suggest by talking about the time, the spatial and temporal structures that we encountered in how this performance developed, is that the category of presence was becoming meaningless. So this is like the whole result of this artistic research process, so to speak, was that presence had become a meaningless category in these forms of communication that we engage in when we do Zoom conferences, which is a bit of surprising because the more common idea is that we have a form of telepresence there, but actually that's not what the result of our research process was. I mean, in the case of the I think presence is not such an interesting category because it's films, but it's also very interesting, very important in the examples of echo camera, of echo chamber, because there the liveness of the performance is a crucial element. Like what you've seen is, of course, I think it plays a very important role that this is happening live. You've seen a video recording, but when you see the performance live, it's important that these weird sounds that you hear, that this noise, that this is not a pre-recorded noise, but that's a noise that's producing live, and it's a manifestation of a presence of, well, the medium, you could say, of a presence of the presence of media technology. So that's very crucial for the idea of media theater, that it has to happen live, and that presence is questioned in different ways. I'm sorry, I'm talking so long about this one question, but it's very interesting. So I think questioning how presence manifests itself in media technology would be a central focus of media theater and dramaturgy. Yes.
You touched a little on some questions that are debated by Willem Flusser in his works. So maybe reframing my question a little bit, I'm wondering about intersubjectivity and dialogue, and how does that come to play in this works? What I'm wondering is, what transcends logos in what you're proposing, since is theater, right? What goes beyond the rational cognitive aspect of thinking, if this is a proposition of yours? Maybe it's not.
I have to think about this. I mean, like, again, in the example of echo chamber, I said I was trying to point out that what's happening there, I wouldn't describe that as a logos, because that has no rationality. But it's a presence. It's a presence of a phone. It's a presence of a voice. The technology generates a voice of its own. But that's a pure presence that doesn't have any logos. So maybe in that respect it's comparable to what happens to the human voice. When you ask what transcends logos in human theater, then it's the presence of the voice, the presence of the body. What transcends logos in this technological theater? It's again the presence of the body of technology, of the voice of technology. But I don't know. It's difficult asking. Is it the voice that transcends the logos, or is it the phone, the pure physical fact of voice that transcends the logos, or is it the logos that transcends the pure phone, the pure physical fact of voice? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure how to approach this.
Mais alguém tem perguntas, gente? No? It seems there are no other questions, but okay.
Oops. I would like to ask you, in what sense do you view the second film, the AI generated videos? In what sense do you comprehend them as parodies, or if that idea came into
What?
As parodies?
As parodies?
Yeah, parodies, like
parodies.
Yeah, if they are parodying the original video, if that was the intent at all. It's just something that caught my attention. It's not for any specific reason.
Oh, I never thought of that. That would be funny to think that the AI is actually making fun of us. The AI has the artificial intelligence has analyzed all these videos that were fed into it, and I'm sure the Lumière film was one of them. And now it's just making fun of us by producing a parody of them. I think that's I mean, of course, I don't think that's the case, or I don't think that's really what's happening there. But it would be an interesting way of describing it. I mean, what's happening here, or I think one concept that I haven't mentioned that can be very helpful, I think, to understand this perspective that I was trying to outline, and that was also inspirational for the thesis that was written by our student, is the idea of alien phenomenology by Ian Bogost. I don't know who of you is acquainted with that. I think it's a very interesting book. It's a book by Ian Bogost, one of the thinkers of new materialism. It's called Alien Phenomenology. It was published in, I think, 2012 or so. And I'm also very skeptical about this book, because this book tries to outline how, and he actually phrases it that way, we can understand how the technology perceives things. So this is the thing where like, it even goes so far to that he is writing about how a graphical GPU, a graphical processor, perceives and sees the world, or what a microchip feels, or things like this, which I think is absolute nonsense to ask these questions. But it's still an interesting approach. So the idea is how can we, if we don't take it that seriously, we can ask how can we at least try to align our perception with these technological apparatuses. And so that's also what's at the basis of this research project, or what was an inspiration for this research project. And I think it would be interesting to think about this in a way where one thinks, in what way is this perception of the artificial intelligence of our film heritage actually marked by making fun of it and making a parody of it? I mean, that could be really interesting, yeah.
Hello, my name is Luis Felipe.
Hello.
And I would like to ask about the lockdown diaries and the process of direction and the creation of the body, like the direction of the actors and the bodies in the camera. And like, if you try to explain then the relation between the body and the camera and how this process was done.
You mean how that happened and how we directed it, or?
Yes, like how you directed the actors.
I mean, that was actually, as I said, there was a process. It kind of happened by itself, not entirely. But what happened is we were having these weekly meetings that looked a bit like this, but not as extreme. And we were discussing the videos. And then at some point we said, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a final presentation where we're going to present the videos. And we're going to do it in a way we do these weekly meetings. And then we were also starting to do rehearsals, like online rehearsals of what this final presentation might look like. And at first we still had the idea that maybe we could also have discussions in these final presentations as we had in our weekly meetings. And then more and more we all had the feeling that this doesn't make much sense and this does not really reflect the dynamic of the work. And then we were just saying, okay, let's not do this, let's just sit there. But that was not like, that was the way I remember it, it was kind of a collective idea, okay, let's do it this way. And then we were saying, okay, but what should we do? What should we do then? And then people were saying, yeah, let's do what we are doing all the time now. Let's do yoga. Let's fold origami, because this is what everybody was doing in the lockdown. People were sitting at home and then starting doing everybody was doing yoga and folding origami and working out. And then the participants did that, like came up with this idea by themselves. So there was not a very precise directing where he said you do this and you do this, but that then just a little happened by itself. Yeah.
Última tentativa, mas alguém tem alguma questão? Não? Tá bom. Eu vou encerrar então. There are no further questions, so I'm going to finish it. I'd like to thank you a lot for being here.
Thank you.
And also I would like to thank Patricia Moran, who is responsible for Florian being here through this partnership with USP, and the Fund for Strategic Partnership in Humboldt-University, isn't it? That is also responsible for your project.
The strategic partnership funding which has it made possible that I can be here. Thank you to them as well.
É isso, gente. Obrigado. Boa tarde, viu?